Just welcome everyone. For those of you just joining us, we are going to give people a few minutes to log in and then we will go ahead and get started. So again, for those of you just logging in, we're just going to show a few videos here while others are joining us, and then we will get started.
We pray for the of your being. We pray for the sun that you sing. We pray that your spirit live forever. We pray for the wisdom you beautiful lady, shining waters, beautiful lady of the sea, beautiful lady, shining waters, you will be free. Tokitae, 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 Tokitae. We pray for the beauty of your being. We pray for the song that you sing. We pray that your spirit live forever. We pray for the wisdom you bring. Tokitae, 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 We pray for the beauty of your being. We pray for the song that you sing. We pray that your spirit lives forever. We pray for the wisdom you bring. Tokitae, 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 for the beauty of your being. For the song that you sing. We pray that your spirit live forever. We pray.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but we just wanted to go over a little bit of Zoom instruction. I'm sure most of you are very much familiar with Zoom, but just in case, we just wanted to go over a few things. First of all, you are all muted and we can't see your videos, so feel free to, you don't need to mute. If your cat is walking across your computer screen, we won't see it as much as we may want to, but don't worry about that. We do have a chat feature at the bottom. You will see that, so feel free to use that. And you do have a couple of options. If you click on the little arrow, you can chat to the hosts and panelists. So if you have any questions for us, if something's not working correctly, feel free to just let us know that, or you can send a chat to everyone. If you just want to say hi or make a comment about something that you're seeing, feel free to use it for that. The other feature is the Q&A, and we don't really have a Q&A session built in for today, but if you have any questions, please feel free to write those in there in the Q&A, and we will try to go in and type the answers as much as we possibly can. So if you write questions in chat, we'll try to get to those as well, but they may get lost if a lot of people are chatting. So feel free to put that in the Q&A. And I think that is it for announcements. So I will go ahead and turn this over to Susan, who will get us started. And again, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Cindy. And for those who don't know, that was Cindy Hansen, our education coordinator. And in the background as Tokitae is Amanda Colbert, who is our education assistant, who is helping with all the videos and trying to keep things running smoothly. So we appreciate your patience as we navigate the Zoom world still. The great thing about our Zoom events is that we can reach a lot more people in a much wider area than our live events. It's not quite the same as having in-person events, but we really appreciate all of you who are here joining us today. And we are recording this event, so it will be available after on our YouTube channel. I'm Susan Berta, and this is Howard Garrett. We started Orca Network about 20 years ago. And before that, about 5 years before that, we worked on the Tokitae, began working together on Tokitae, never believing that this many years later, we're still working on it, and that she is a survivor. She's a very special whale. And following this event will be a Lummi event starting at 4 o'clock. And they are working with the Earth Law Center and the Whale Sanctuary Project and us. And it's great to see so many partners working on her freedom. And the Lummies bring a lot of power and legal angles that weren't available to us. So that really gives us hope. But I wanted to start with an acknowledgement of our lands and waters and of the Salish Sea. And for those of you joining us from all over, wherever you are, think back to the ancestors and the history of who the first peoples were wherever you live, and remember and acknowledge their presence and their history. And for us, the tribes, the Coast Salish tribes, we honor their past, but we also honor their present and their future. And we both acknowledge that these are their lands and their waters, as they are the orcas' waters. The southern residents are much like a tribe that lives in the Salish Sea. But we not only just acknowledge them, we really value our working relationships and friendships with many Coast Salish tribes. And we honor their ancestral knowledge and their historical and oral histories of the natural world, and all that they're doing to restore salmon runs and to protect orcas and to help with bringing Tokitae home. I did want to mention in June, in Orca Month, we had a Coast Salish Orca Salmon event. It happened, unfortunately, during the heat wave. So if you missed that, it's on our YouTube channel, and it involved many of the regional Coast Salish tribes, and it was a really interesting event, and I just encourage you to watch that if you missed it. The other thing I wanted to bring up is often with our August 8th events, even though it's to commemorate the captures and the orcas who were killed during the captures or who died after captivity, and to remember Lolita in Tokitae, Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut, that she is still a member of the Southern resident community. But often when we have gathered in person, it's after something sad has happened. Telequa was carrying her dead calf on her nose several years ago when we gathered, and during our ceremony we shared our grief and memories of, you know, of all the orcas we've lost, but also the sadness she was going through. So this year, even though our ceremony is going to be just a video at the end, I wanted to honor the memory of two very special elders that we have lost in these past weeks. And if you signed in early, you may have seen the videos. One was Jim Hilaire of the Lummi tribe. He was with the cultural department and a teacher. He was the canoe race announcer for our Penn Cove Water Festival since the early 90s. He and his family helped with the ceremony for K7 Lummi when she passed on San Juan Island. Just a very, very special person and a huge loss for the Lummi Nation and for all of us who knew Jim, who also went by Smitty. And the other elder that we lost was a Southern resident, male K21 Cappuccino, who was found near death and has likely passed. He was the oldest male orca in the Southern residence, and one we all have special memories of. So as we go through today and the ceremony at the end, we just ask that you hold their spirits close. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they both passed around the same time. And I really feel their spirits are out there swimming with the orcas. So we'll start with Rosie Caillou James, who's another dear friend from the Salish Nation, sharing her stories and her father's stories and recollections of the Penn Cove orca capture.
Penn Cove Water Festival. It brings me home to that cove where my dad loved so much to visit the spirits. Even before my dad knew where the spirits were, where they were going to be. My dad never pretended to be anybody. My dad called himself a man without a country. And I truly believe that that was the orca in him talking. A man without a country, an orca without a country. Brings me back to 1970, the day that I brought my dad out there to visit the water spirits as he always had. And that day, that one day that we decided to go out there is when they were hoisting the pods to take them to Florida. And my dad sat on the beach and had his arms crossed, he had one leg over the log like this. And he was watching, and there was tears just coming out of his eyes. And he was speaking to them. He was speaking to them and telling them, we'll come and set you free. We'll come. That's my promise to you. Then my dad died. And my promise to him was to keep working for his family. So the Penn Cove Water Festival every year is not just about canoes and people, celebration. It's about ancestors and orcas as well. I share my grief with all water spirits, with all villages, whether or not they're on a reservation they still have their spirit that lives in the villages along the water to be near their families of water spirits. That's what it means to me, the connection. The connection, now you know what it is.
So at this point, I would like to introduce 3 videos, 2 very short ones and one about 5 minutes. The first is Don McGaffin in 1971. There were 2 captures in Penn Cove in 1970 when Toki was taken, in 1971, a slightly smaller capture, but Don McGaffin was a TV reporter for King 5 TV, and he's expressing his frustration that these captures are being done in a complete ignorance of the whales, of questions about them. And he asked excellent questions that need to be answered. And that is followed by Terry Newby, who was the Fish and Game Department, as it was known then, observer of that capture. And he updates us with the knowledge that was known at that time in 1971. And following that is a very heartfelt video that describes Toki's life throughout as we know it, from capture and before to the present day, that I think you'll find very engrossing. So let's play the videos.
Whale catchers and oceanariums keep pounding the public relations drum, taking the position that one of the big reasons the killer whale is taken is for scientific reasons. Yet some marine biologists don't know whether to laugh or cry at that suggestion. They point out that what little work is done is actually physiological, aimed at keeping the killer whale alive in a tank, which keeps the exhibitor alive at the box office. What isn't known is far more important than what is known. For example, they don't know how many whales there are out there in the Puget Sound. They don't know if they're migratory, whether they live here and die here. They don't know how often they have calves. They don't know the period of gestation of the cows. They don't know the suckling periods of the calves. They just don't know very much about the subject at all. And what they really don't know is whether the whales taken by Griffin and Goldsberry these past 7 years, constantly, are from the same family or from the same pod. yet the captures go on.
I don't think any animal, even the horses, which I've been working with, really enjoy captivity. They don't necessarily gain adult normal weight that you'd find in the wild. They have teeth problems that are just atrocious in harbor seals, for example. Whales, pilot whales in California and Marineland of the Pacific, Bubbles, the famous one, she banged her head against the sides of her tank, and they finally released her because they just felt that she wasn't, they used the term psychotic.
You mean just kind of banging
her
back
head
all day long?
Yeah, and no animal, I think, especially as intelligent as the marine mammals are, really would enjoy being in confinement. They're not a confined animal. They're free moving. They live in a three-dimensional world. It's very aesthetic. They have plenty of food and plenty of playmates. The only real killer whale information that we have is regarding their general biology comes as a spin-off of the killer whale work done by the Japanese and Norwegians in the Atlantic and Eastern Pacific. But here in the North Pacific, we don't have really any information at all. We have a very minimal amount of data. And the kind of thing I'm talking about is the things like abundance, distribution, sex ratios of the pods. If these things are known, it's not in print.
My name is Lolita. I'm an orca. I've been held captive here at the Miami Seaquarium for over 50 years. But it's not a home. It's a prison, and I fear I will never be released. I was born in the mid-1960s. I had a family who loved me and cared for me. They taught me how to dive and find food. We spent most of our time off the coast of Washington State. We swam with a community of several other orcas. This was our pod. We helped each other out. My life was good. Until August 8th, 1970. Our pod was out looking for food when suddenly there were loud, scary booms. I looked at my parents, and they seemed afraid. They didn't know what was happening. There were noisy, frightening things on the water zooming all around us. Speedboats. It was so loud and disorienting. It was like a nightmare. Then came the nets. They were going after the young orcas like me. Our parents couldn't save us. The speedboats pushed them away. I tried to swim away, but the nets caught me. I was trapped. I couldn't move, and I was so scared. It was chaotic. Eventually, the commotion died down. It looked like they had captured 7 of us. But then I also saw dead orcas. 4 babies and an adult. I was pulled out of the ocean and put in a container filled with water that was barely bigger than my own body. I spent days trapped there, not knowing what was happening. They were taking me somewhere. I had so many questions. Where was my family? Were they looking for me? Would I ever get to see them again? The place they brought me was the Miami Seaquarium, the place that I would never get to leave. At first, I was excited to get out of the cramped container and be able to swim again. But when I finally got out, I found myself in a small tank. And this tank was permanent. When I lived in the ocean, I could swim over 100 miles some days, and I could dive deep into the sea. But this tank was only as deep as I am long, and not much wider. And it wasn't just for me. It was also for Hugo, another orca. He was captured a couple of years earlier, and we were about the same age. Even though he had been living there for 2 years, he was just as desperate as me to get out. He explained that I was brought here to perform tricks for humans. If we did the tricks they wanted, they would give us food. Then we'd have to do them in front of big crowds of people. The rest of the time there was nothing to do but float on the water. That's it. No long swims that we craved. No diving. Nothing. Hugo got frustrated a lot, but mostly he was really sad and depressed. And that was a feeling I would become very familiar with. From then on, it was pretty much the way he described. Jumping into the air, balancing trainers on my back, and bouncing beach balls against my nose. I had to do it even though I didn't want to. If I felt sick, tired, scared, sad, I still had to do the tricks. But I always had Hugo. He was suffering too. The captivity was wearing him down. He would bash his head against the wall. The days were bleak, but at least Hugo and I were together. I would try to comfort him when he was feeling down. The trainers wanted us to have babies so that they could amuse even more people. We tried, but it never happened. After 10 years of being together, the pain and stress of captivity became too much for Hugo. He rammed his head into the wall until it killed him. Hugo was the only friend I had in this world, and he was gone. That was 1980, and I haven't had any kind of companionship since. In fact, I haven't gotten to see any other orcas. The Seaquarium brought in dolphins to take his place. The dolphins are going through the same hardship I am, but we aren't able to connect in the same way. We're just too different. And our differences cause them to hurt me sometimes. Real wounds. But the trainers don't seem to care very much because the dolphins are still in here with me. I'm stuck inside my head, day after day. I daydream about getting to see my family again, being back in the ocean with my pod, swimming 100 miles in a single day, and diving into the depths of the ocean. But those things ended for me over 50 years ago, and I'm still here at the Miami Seaquarium. Please don't go to marine parks. If you do, you're supporting the greedy people who have kept me here my entire life. I still dream that someday I'll get to leave, but until then, I can only hope that others won't have to endure the same fate as me. Thank you for watching.
Well, that was certainly heart-wrenching, but that's the motivation to bring her out of there and bring her home. Next, I'd like to introduce a short clip, and here we're going way back to a CBC documentary back in the 80s at some point, showing Mike Big, the originator of the photo identification method that has been the key to everything we know about them. All of the pod systems, the different communities, everything has been as a result of this method that he pioneered. This was sent to us by John Ford, and it's a good little interview. It really gives you some historical perspective on how it all started and where we started from. Run the video, please.
It was Mike Big who devised a method of counting the killer whales. The key was his discovery that every whale could be identified by its own distinctive markings.
There were open saddle patches. That's the white patch at the base of the fin, at the back of the fin. There would be scratches. That again was another feature, rather like a fingerprint. Within the next 2 or 3 years, we had expanded the survey to photo identify all of the individuals on the coast. And we were able to then put them down into a catalog with their genealogical trees. And since then, we've been monitoring the population every year.
Instead of the thousands of killer whales believed to inhabit the coast, Mike Big found only about 300. Government regulation soon brought an end to live captures. His study also revealed the existence of 2 completely separate races of killer whales. A group of resident whales that gather in certain known areas, and transients whose movements are unpredictable. Remarkably, the 2 races coexist in apparent harmony.
Now, how have they come to this arrangement? First, they don't mix. We've traveled with both races many times and have never seen them mix. Sometimes they'll get within 100 yards of one another, but the 2 groups really don't integrate. Secondly, they don't eat the same foods, so they don't compete. Transients eat marine mammals, and residents eat fish. So it's as though the 2 races had agreed on some sort of treaty. I'll eat one kind of food, you eat another. This way they can stay in the same area and not compete.
Well, that's a fitting way to start the the portion on southern resident orca culture. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I thought Mike said it well. They have some sort of treaty. That's a very intriguing idea.
Yeah, and this is, unlike other species out in the wild. And we still see it to this day where the transients now named after Mike as Biggs orcas will swim near the southern residents, but not interact or interbreed. They truly are separate, now called ecotypes. So following that, I have the pleasure of introducing two videos by two of my favorite whale brothers, somewhat famous. Howard Garrett's will be first, followed by an interview that Howard did with Ken Balcomb, his brother, on the Elwha last weekend. These two brothers taught me everything I know about orcas and taught me about passion and commitment and dedication. They have given their lives to fight for the orcas and for the salmon, to take down the dams so that there are salmon to feed the orcas. They have dedicated their whole lives to the whales and done so much education. We're just really thankful that they are here fighting for the southern residents, and I will let them do what they do best and share their wisdom and insight from their many decades of insight, each from their own perspective. I love how Howie comes from his sociological degree background, and Ken comes from the biologist scientist background, but they both have been really changed by the orcas, and they both done so much to help the southern residents.
For many years, I have believed that Tokitae, Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut, Toki, still remembers where she came from. She remembers her home waters, and she remembers her family, the southern resident orcas. So it wouldn't be a big shock to her to return to where she was born and literally raised, brought up, taught how to be an orca by her family. It has a nice ring to it, and if you want to believe it, it's pretty clear that it's true if you know a little of the natural history of orcas. But there are many skeptics. Certainly the Seaquarium has been telling the media that the shock would kill her. They don't say how, but most people, including the courts, the permitting agencies, and the scientific community, including many whale scientists who are called upon as authorities to give their opinion on whether it can be done safely, tend to believe it, or at least they think it could be dangerous enough that they really don't want any part of that kind of an experiment. And I have found in my 25 years of trying to make the case to bring Toki home that that is the biggest obstacle. That's what gets in the way. That's why we can't get cooperation and agreement to bring her home. So I'd like to address that. Let's take a look at it. How she remembers her family, who she is as a member of her family. A landmark paper came out 20 years ago called Culture in Whales and Dolphins that established that the vocal and behavioral cultures found in orcas appear to have no parallel outside humans and represent an independent evolution of cultural faculties. That concept of highly developed cultural capacity in orcas hasn't really been developed or expanded on in the past 20 years since it was published, but field studies around the world have confirmed that orcas everywhere belong to traditional cultures. Currently, scientists have proposed 22 distinct ecotypes, but others have not yet been documented. The current issue of Marine Mammal Science includes a paper describing at least 3 populations around New Zealand and Western Australia, based on genetics. Also, a particular ecotype may include more than one culturally distinct community. The resident ecotype, for example, includes 6 culturally and genetically different communities found from the Salish Sea to Kamchatka, Russia. They are all lumped together as one ecotype because they all eat mainly Chinook salmon, and they are all descended from a common ancestor population that came over the North Pole from the Atlantic during the interglacials well over 100,000 years ago. But there are 6 different cultures along the northern Pacific Rim included in the resident ecotype. So a wide variety of separate and distinct cultures have now been described, each with its own vocal signals, specialized diet, and ways of catching food, association patterns, etc. Genetics correlate perfectly with cultures because there is no interbreeding between them. That tells us something, that among the traditions found universally in orcas is to limit mating to members of one's own community, which is a big extended family. That raises some questions about interbreeding, but that tradition is practiced by every member of every known population for probably thousands of generations. This is a very strong cultural influence over behavior, in this case, mating. Just by contrast, about 2% of the DNA in the genomes of modern-day human people with Eurasian ancestry in the northern hemisphere is Neanderthal in origin. No judgment here, but it gives us some insight into the power of orca cultural traditions over their members. Orcas live as members of cultures. Orca cultural bonds may be like no other. Also, the brain of the killer whale, or Sinus orca, may be the largest of all taxa, supporting a panoply of cognitive abilities. Orca brains and auditory systems are well developed before birth, and their brains are already 3 times the size of adult human brains. Sounds reach the developing fetus undiminished through the liquid medium of the womb. So orca calves are hearing their families' voices and learning their languages even before they're born. So cultural learning and identity as members of cultures are deeply ingrained in orcas. They have very big brains, which implies long memories, and nothing is more important to an orca than their family and traditions and how to catch their specialized diet. Young orcas build deep, lifelong emotional bonds with their mothers and their entire families. They learn everything from them, including who they are as family members. Toki is, and always has been, a part of her family since birth, and even before birth, despite now 51 years in that tank in Miami. Yes, that's a long time to be bored and lonely. It would be easy to believe that she can't possibly maintain her cultural identity. But we can't assume that we know the limits of what she knows.
You ever wonder what keeps Toki alive? How is she able to survive 51 years in captivity in that tiny little plant?
Well, I think the natural lifespan of females we know now is way longer than we ever expected. It's like, 80 to 100 is definitely achievable. And, even in the early years, we thought they average could be at least in their 50s.
So just
So-
minimal maintenance, just food, basically,
Food?
and
Well,
not too dirty
thank
water.
goodness she had a very caring veterinarian and Jesse White at the beginning, and he made sure she had a good diet. She probably got a lot of drugs. You know, had to deal with psychologically with a ridiculously little tank.
That's what I'm wondering. I mean, almost all the others died, you know, that were in captivity.
Yeah, why did she make it? Well, I think, you know, she had real serious love from the beginning.
Okay.
And it's probably still there. I mean, I don't think anybody that takes care of whales doesn't love them, you know, but it isn't that the conditions that they can provide them are happy for every whale. A lot of them are real unhappy, and a lot of errors have been made, especially in the early years. You know, they couldn't keep them alive for more than a year because they didn't feed them right. I mean, giving them salmon that are spawned out that they can't even use for cat food is not good. I mean, what do you expect? A bacterial infection. What do you expect? You know, deteriorating health and death.
They somehow got it right enough, or with enough tender loving care to keep her alive.
Yeah, it's pretty astonishing. I mean, he was a good man, man.
Sure.
And there have been good people, and they made way more money than they paid for her, and she's earned her retirement
Well, how do you think she'll react
thousands
in
of
the
times.
first minutes and hours of coming back to a protected place with her people around that she knows and trusts, but in an ocean, in this ocean, in the Salish Sea,
With tides and with shellfish and with kelp and with
all of that
creatures. I think
stimulation,
she'll
all of
be,
that.
well, at first, you know, there'll be a couple of days of like, where am I?
Yeah.
You know, but she'll have her people with her, so it's okay, it's okay,
Right.
it's okay. And then she'll check it out,
Yeah.
and then she'll, hey, this is pretty cool, you know, this is a lot better. I don't want to put a value judgment in her head particularly, but she got a lot more space. She doesn't have to worry about bumping into something. She's got room. She's got natural things around her. Things that she could probably remember from her so-called childhood or very early period.
I bet so.
Yeah, they don't forget stuff.
No. I'm
Yeah,
sure not.
I mean, we're brothers, and I remember you were my brother when I was a little kid.
Right.
Same person. And I remember pushing your wheel, your what do you call it, stroller? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I was only maybe 6, and you were probably 1.
Yeah. And orcas are precocious when they're born. I mean, they're well developed.
Yeah, they got good memories.
Yeah. So she learned all
that I don't doubt that she'll have a remembrance of what it was like.
Yeah.
And I don't doubt that she won't have a feeling of freedom to just, wow, this is really, 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 really nice. You know, that was okay. I mean, she's still going to get fed. She's still going to get care. It's not like there's nothing for her to do. There's plenty for her to do now. She just doesn't get as much applause.
Yeah. Right.
But that was not the driver anyway. It was food.
Right. But she won't have to do certain routines to get food.
She'll still probably do routines for exercise.
Yeah.
But at some point, she won't need to do the routines that she did in her show. She can have her own routines, you know. I mean, it's turning something over. You know, there was this thing on the bottom that moves its little hands around when she turns it over, you know, a crab, for example.
Yeah.
You know, that could be pretty fascinating, you know. Maybe she had seen that in the past, maybe she hadn't. But, wow, and now a fish. And there's another one. Yeah. You know, they're not fillets. They actually come in, you know, Costco size. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, she'll love
I
it.
think it'll be stimulating.
Yeah,
Therapeutic.
yeah. I don't have any doubts about that, and I don't really have any doubts that she could be moved safely. I mean, if they were to sell her to another park, they would take every effort to move her safely to the other park so that they didn't end up having to give the money back.
Yeah. Which can be done. I mean,
Which can be done. It's been done over and over and over.
A lot of experience.
That's the upside of having that ability, you know, that, yeah, you can move them around.
Right.
Just that, no, you shouldn't take them out anymore. Because we learned that they don't do that well. Even though she's survived that many years, it's because she's one that she's kind of won the lottery in terms of being with the right humans for long enough and cared for enough. And the right thing to do for her now, since she's more than paid for her retirement, is retire her. And let her, if she wants, go out and listen to her family.
Yeah.
Go out and be with them. I mean, that's getting a little hopeful, but I think she'll do it.
I tend to think so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even Keiko swam around those other whales. It's just that nobody really went out there to find out who his family was.
Yeah.
I mean, they sort of dabbled at it, but, you know, had they really seriously wanted to find out, they could have found out.
Yeah. But nobody's going to adopt an adult male into their natural line, you know, and we know that.
Yeah, that'd be a serious drawback to begin with. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And whether or not she has any living relatives or mother is irrelevant. She has the language and she has the, you know, she has the grammar school part.
Yeah.
So I think she'll do okay. And she'll be cared for anyway, so.
Exactly.
It isn't like you're doing some grand experiment and risking her life. I think it would be wonderful to see. Very heartwarming. So do it.
Which would also bring us back to the orcas being so iconic and beloved. The value is to help them, and that leads to understanding the ecosystem, the food supply, the connections with the rest of the habitat and ecosystem that shouldn't be damaged by extraction and utilization. And
yeah.
so
If she can help people understand that, especially the newer people that are just coming up, going through their education process, if she can help people understand through actually state-of-the-art science that can be done with her at the time and relate it to what needs to be done on Earth,
So these topics are not really in complete isolation. I mean, Toki,
No.
southern residents, salmon, Elwha River, there's
Yeah, all things are connected.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So,
How are we doing?
breach the dam.
Reach the dam.
Let the whale go.
Reach the dam.
Yeah, Orca survey.
Your glasses are covering the dorsal fin, so maybe you ought to lift your glasses. Yeah.
Orca survey.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, yeah.
We're back.
That was a really fun interview down by the Elwha River with Ken. Listening to the bros talk orcas and Toki and salmon. So,
Dams.
and dams, dams. So we're gonna take, show a few music videos about Toki. If you want to stand up and stretch or dance or go grab something to drink or just sit back and enjoy. And then we'll come back with more interviews and more on southern resident orca culture.
Is a long haul, trapped inside these prison walls. Doesn't time pass by at a crawl, Lolita? Can you tell me what was your crime? Lock you away from all of your kind, lost and afraid for such a long time, Lolita. Bring Lolita home. Bring Lolita home. If you knew all she'd been through, leave the girl alone. Sing Lolita home. Sing Lolita, sing Lolita home. Sing Lolita. She's been gone way too long. Bring Lolita home. They stole you away from paradise. They sold you for a ticket price. But people can be cold as ice, Lolita. Out there your family still waits for you, far and away from this pent-up zoo, where people point and they laugh at you, Lolita. Bring Lolita home. Bring Lolita home. If you knew all she'd been through, just leave the girl alone. Sing Lolita home. Sing Lolita, sing Lolita home. She's been gone way too long. Bring Lolita home. Help is coming, though the hour is late. Save you from your twisted fate. Storm the walls, tear down the gates. Bring Lolita home. Bring Lolita home. If you knew all she'd been through, just leave the girl alone. Sing Lolita home. Sing Lolita, sing Lolita home. Sing Lolita. She's been gone 5 years is a long, long haul, trapped inside these prison walls. Doesn't time pass by at a crawl, Lolita?
People ask me every day, what do I do to look the way that I do?
Better days are coming. Better days for you. I have watched you float in that man-made moat for far too many years. Started out so free in the Salish Sea, now filled with your mother's tears. Capture so cruel that some captors who were harmed still cry today. Ripped from the water, the ocean's small daughter, those humans for the soul's better grave. As you float and you wait, in our hands lies your fate. We must open the gate. It's time to bring Tokitae home. Better days are coming. Better days for you. I'm gonna advertise. It's really no surprise with the madness and anger instead. Companies raking profits, filling deep greedy pockets with the sanity and blood of those they kill. It's time to stop the madness, stop the pain and the sadness. In the name of entertainment, it's our lies. It's time to freeze temptation, small tanks in every nation. It's time that humans step up as allies. As you float and you wait, in our hands lies your fate. We must open the gates. It's time to bring Tokitae home.
Okay, it is now my great pleasure and honor to introduce Alexandra Morton to regale us with some stories of northern residents, and I don't even know what will follow, but I do want to congratulate Alexandra, knowing that it was a huge group team effort involving First Nations and many others to get rid of some of those salmon farms up there. So thank you, Alexandra.
Hi, yes. 38 salmon farms are on their way out right now, which means that wild salmon are getting to sea. And while I was, instrumental in a lot of it, it was, in the end, it was First Nations governments standing up and just saying enough. And Canadian government had the sense to listen. But I know all of you are here on the issue of whales in captivity and the impact this is having on, well, the whales themselves, children that are growing up and looking at these animals in captivity, thinking that we have dominion over them and that it is our right to cause such an enormous suffering. And I was one of those people. When I began to do research on the whales Orca and Corky, which were from British Columbia, caught in 1968, 1969, I thought they looked happy. They had that smile on their face, and I believed that you could do research on orca in captivity. And so I did start with my research on the correlation between sounds and behavior. So what the whales were doing and what they were saying. I began that work at Marine Land of the Pacific in Los Angeles. And when Corky gave birth, so she's a A5 resident pod captive. And when she gave birth, I thought, oh, wow, I'm going to be able to study this young whale learning the language and maybe figure out, what's important, where they start. Because you don't really know anything about whale sounds. Is it the silences in between the sounds? Is it the duration? Is it, we just don't know where the information is being carried. But, it was a very powerful experience watching those two whales. I was in my late teens and early 20s when I started working with them, just doing this on my own. It wasn't a job. And I saw things that, were going to be impossible to explain to the scientific community with any sense of credibility. How they would greet the morning dawn with this really interesting, you could only call it a ritual, where they would go to one spot on the tank and they'd squirt water at it just very casually in the early pre-dawn light. And then when the sun came up over the bleachers and hit the tank wall, the spot that they were squirting water at was always where the band of light first hit the water. And of course, this spot moved through the year and they always knew where it was. And once the sun showed up, they became very active and were pressing their tongue against this spot and squirting water and creating huge waves in their tanks. And I just thought, wow, nobody's going to believe this, that these creatures were responding to sunlight like this. And I also saw them do highly synchronized behaviors where they would go up to the platform where the trainers would feed them, and they'd lay their flukes out on the platform in exactly the same orientation and raise one pectoral fin, kind of spooning together. And when I described this to the trainers, they're like, yeah, that's way too complicated. You can't train them to do positioning that many pieces of their body all at the same time. And so, of course, they were shocked when they saw the pictures. But there was something about the act of synchrony that was very, very interesting to the whales, that they really liked to do things perfectly together. And when I saw the first baby, well, all the babies get born, suddenly that act of synchrony made sense to me, because the little whale's life depended on opening her blowhole at exactly the same moment as her mother. And so she was swimming with her and they'd rise out of the surface and boom, breathe at the same time. And in this way, the little whale wasn't sucking in water. And of course, when you watch whales in the wild during rest, they're still breathing together as adults, tens of years later. And so this leads to the understanding that the bonds between orca are potentially more, they go to another level than our bonds, because we may be breathing together with our family members, but we're certainly not conscious of doing that. And I watched in the wild when A9 died and her two sons were on their own without their mother for the first time. And for weeks, they went around Hansen Island. It was a huge moment in their lives. It was not just the loss of mom, away we go. They were really lost without her. And as we know, adult male killer whales don't survive their mothers for very long. And this is confusing to all of us. I had the strange experience of describing this to the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, at one point at a lunch, and she was a bit disturbed by it. She found this highly unnatural, but of course it is natural. And I saw so many deeply tragic things at Marineland that even through my lens of wanting to only do the science, not be a whale hugger, tree hugger, I just wanted to concentrate on what they were saying and what it meant. But when Corky lost her first baby, it was tragic because she was full of milk. It was coming out as she swam, but there was no whale there to push the baby down to the mammaries. And the baby seemed to have some innate instructions to go to a white spot and nuzzle around and try to find the milk. And so because the tank was round and Corky was spending all of her time pushing the baby off the wall, because the baby, very rapidly got this huge wound on her rostrum from hitting the wall. So Corky was attentively pushing her off. And so the baby fixated on her eye patch and then would try to nurse on the corner of her mouth, like perfect nursing behavior, but in the wrong place. And when the baby died and they took it out, Corky went to the bottom of the tank and began to produce this one call over and over and over again for 3 days. She would rise to the surface, grab a breath, go back down, produce this call, sort of like that, just endlessly. And Orky, the male, he seemed a little confused by this. He knew she was in distress. He didn't go down there with her. He kept circling on the surface, and every now and then he made a call. He'd go like that. She just ignored him. And on the third night, Corky answered him, and she rose to the surface and she swam beside him. And the two of them made this call back and forth for a long time. And the next day she accepted fish from the trainers and began, acting normal. It gave me a lot of interest in that call. But a few months later, when I arrived at Marineland to do a recording session, because I would spend 12 hours watching the two of them during the day, and then the next month I'd watch them for 12 hours during the night. So I was getting a sample of sound and behavior from the two different time periods. And I arrived this day and excuse me, the whole oceanarium was awash in water. And I had this really bad feeling, maybe there'd been an earthquake or something, because their tank was out of the water. It was built up. It was this huge kind of high-rise structure with spiral windows that went down in layers. And Corky was sitting there spy hopping, and she had a huge crease in her nose. And she had broken one of the windows. Like, this is incredibly thick, double-planed glass. And the window that she broke looked into the place where they stored the stuffed baby killer whales, which you know, okay, there's probably 100 windows in that tank, and she broke the one that looked in on something that obviously meant something to her, a lot to her. Maybe it was the thing she wanted most in the world, which was her babies. And I realized at some point that, you know, I was studying animals that were suffering terribly, and that to think that I would learn anything from them was misguided. And so I actually found Corky's family up in British Columbia, and I spent one summer just watching them in the wild, and then I packed my stuff and I came back and I moved to Canada, and I've been here ever since, and that was in 1980. But I felt a deep guilt, and I feel it to this day, that I know where her family is. I have been with her family and she has not. And probably the saddest thing that I heard, I didn't actually see it because it was years after I left, was when SeaWorld bought Orky, the male, and somehow they built a sling big enough to move him. And they got this sling under him and they started to winch him out, and Corky tried to climb into the sling with him because she knew what that meant. She knew that when whales went into the sling, she would never hear their voice again. So yeah, studying whales is difficult because there's a lot of complicated questions, and what to do with these whales, how to release them. Like Corky doesn't have any bottom teeth left. She's ground them all off on the tank. So it's very hard to know what to do, but I certainly appreciate all of you thinking so much about these amazing creatures and giving them the respect that they deserve, and making sure other people know these are not toys. These are not things for us to play with and remove and cause immeasurable suffering, but rather to learn from. And I know that nothing on earth today is going to be saved unless we love it, and we love it in a powerful way, not one where we follow them around in boats, but one where we do what they need. And I think that's what many of you are trying to do. So thank you so much.
Sorry. I cannot get our camera on.
Go ahead.
I'm trying.
There we are.
There we go. Sorry. Oh,
wow,
thank you.
Alexandra, thank you so much for that. That ripped my heart apart.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, but in a very, very good and insightful way. It tells us so much about people. It felt good, but it hurt. So thank you.
Okay.
Yes, and thanks for all you do and have done. You know, you're another who's dedicated her whole life to the whales and to their food and just such passion and dedication, and your decades of knowledge. We are just very honored to have you here and share those with us. I know it's hard for you to go back to those memories as well.
Yes. I just want to say though, many of us that have worked with Orca, you know, I know this is controversial to say this, but they in some way read our minds. And I have no idea how this happens, but I'm not going to deny it. Too many people have experienced it. So I'm going to guess that there's some potential that they can feel what all of you are trying to do. And if you could hold that thought and you know, I don't know that you need to act on it, but just embody it as maybe true and let it guide you. I think it's very, very important to realize that there's these linkages, because, you know, there were things that happened with her and with the wild whales where I was just like, okay, I have no idea how that happened. They read my mind. And when I tell this to other whale researchers, they're like, yeah, yeah, I've seen that too. So,
yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, yeah.
Not so well understood, but I feel it. so much, and I've seen it in so many ways. And in fact, we're about to follow up with a video telling the story about one time when that happened.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I'll get out of the way then. Carry on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
All
much, Alex. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Okay, thank you. Wow. Yeah, I'm really glad she said that, because we felt that when we visit Toki, and I know other people who visited her. She feels our intent, whether she's reading our mind. I held up a photo of a new calf in the southern residence to her once, and she came up and just looked with one eye and then the other, and whether she could see the photo or she was seeing what I was seeing in my mind, but she knew I was bringing news of her family and that I was letting her know we aren't going to give up, and I know she feels that. Yeah, the next video is with Ralph Monroe, former Secretary of State, who has done a lot he really helped with stopping the captures. He had connected with J6, and they named J6 Ralph after him. And when J6 died, it was when we lost a lot of the whales in the late 90s. And Ralph decided to do a press conference to raise awareness that we're losing the orcas. And I'm going to give a few details because he doesn't go into detail as much, but as he was talking, J-Pod showed up, and one of the whales kept breaching behind him, and she breached 6 times. And afterwards, we found out it was J8, J6's sister, who breached 6 times, exactly at the time Ralph was talking about his connection with J6. So we will share the video of Ralph talking about this and his connections with the orcas.
It's interesting. If you've never had an animal look you in the eye like J6 looked at me, it's the experience of a lifetime. And I don't know who intervened in that meeting, if it was the animal or me or God, but there was a connection. And I was heartbroken when J6 died. And but the remarkable sensitivity, I'm not a dreamer or out there in La La Land, but I'll tell you, this species has a remarkable connection to us in weird and mysterious ways, and I've seen it happen myself. One example that we laugh and talk about and enjoy remembering was during the years that so many whales were dying, and we weren't sure what was killing them and why they were dying, and no one was really paying any attention, and the pods were diminishing. And this was after kind of the capture era, but there was just a lot of whales being lost. And so we wanted to call some public attention to this. And by this time I was Secretary of State, and I told my staff, we're going to go to San Juan Island. We're going to have a funeral for the whales. And they thought I was crazy nuts, but I said, no, I think it's worth it. Let's go talk about how many are dying. And I remember that day when we got to San Juan Island, and I stopped to see Ken Balcomb and some others, and they said, Ralph, there haven't been any whales around here for, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. And he said that they just haven't been here. And there's none in the area that we know of. And so you could have your little press conference down there and so forth, but I don't think you're going to have a chance for the press to get any pictures of whales, which we kind of hoped for, but we said, well, okay, that's a remote chance and it probably won't happen. And it was interesting, about an hour before the event, Balcomb called me, Ken called me, and he said, Ralph, we've just seen the whales coming across on the southern end of San Juan. And he said, looks like they're heading north towards you. And I thought he was kidding me. I kind of laughed and said, "Yeah, right, Ken. You know that's not going to happen." And it was very interesting. We were there at Lime Kiln, and I had my back to the kind of facing to the crowd, and the cameras were all focused on me. And suddenly I looked up and I was speaking just briefly there to open the press conference. And suddenly I saw all the cameras just swing away from me and right out to the bay. And there they were. And it was J-Pod, and they were leaping and jumping. And it was because we were there. And I believe that in my heart. And I think that they knew that people were standing up for them. And that's something that I know will be hard for a lot of people to comprehend, but there are so many other examples. You hear of examples around the world. In Australia, where whales have led stray fishermen back to their port, or things have happened here in a similar fashion. And these whales were just frolicking and jumping and breaching, and we couldn't believe it. But we got the attention we wanted on the species, and we brought attention back to the fact that we had a real problem on our hand and we had to figure out. So what's all this led to? Well, it's led to no captures, and it's led to a different attitude towards the animals. And a lot of those little kids that learned to love whales at SeaWorld, even though I don't like SeaWorld, they went to SeaWorld, they learned to love whales, and they come home and they don't want anybody to touch them. Leave them alone, let them swim free. And they become our allies. The little kids have those as they grow up, especially. But I want to say that one of the things we've learned is that there are family groups, and there are no question they're family groups. We watched in the capture operations in Budd Inlet, and I was only about 60 feet away, 70 feet away. And you could tell mothers and siblings, some were in the net, some were outside the net, screaming back and forth at each other. And I will probably hear those screams in my head the rest of my life. I can still bring them up if I want to hear them. And it was gruesome. It was awful what we heard. And we had no doubt in our minds that there were families there. And with Lolita or Tokitae, there's a family here. And I truly believe that whale could be rehabilitated and brought back to be and hopefully live out its life right here. And so much could be learned. So much could be learned. And unfortunately, the Miami Seaquarium won't cooperate with anything. They won't let us cooperate on medical research or on blood samples or anything. And that's a shame, because that hurts the entire species. So it's been quite a journey. Now there's not just a few people involved, there's thousands of people involved all over the world. And the job that everyone has done, and Howard and Susan are my heroes. Ken Balcomb's my hero. Paul Splong's my hero. And so many others who have just carried out this work and carried out these efforts and made for a better world for all of us, and a better place for all of us to live. So time marches on, but people have to replace us. People have to carry on this work. People have to do this job, and they will, and we'll protect this species, and we'll be one of the few places in the world where somebody can say, well, I'm glad they stood up for them years ago, because today it's a better place. So.
And we thank Ralph Monroe for that, and for his, 45 or 50 years of helping to protect southern residents and orcas everywhere, and to help us bring Toki home. So next, we have a couple of videos. The first one is about the grandmother hypothesis, which apparently shocked the Queen of England when Alexander told her about it. that goes into the relationship of the males with their mothers. It's some lessons learned from applying the scientific method by really looking into what are their associations and what are their behaviors. And I think you'll find it very fascinating. It's animated, it's well produced, and it really tells a story. And that'll be followed up with some videos narrated. These are drone videos from safely and unintrusively way up above the whales, but looking down on how they relate with each other. And that'll be narrated by Michael Weiss of the Center for Whale Research. So let's go ahead and roll the videos.
Off the rugged coast of the Pacific Northwest, pods of killer whales inhabit the frigid waters. Each family is able to survive here thanks mainly to one member, its most knowledgeable hunter, the grandmother. These matriarchs can live 80 years or more, while most males die off in their 30s. Though killer whales inhabit every major ocean, until recently we knew very little about them. The details of their lives eluded scientists until an organization called the Center for Whale Research began studying a single population near Washington State and British Columbia in 1976. Thanks to their ongoing work, we've learned a great deal about these whales, known as the southern residents. And the more we learn, the more this population's elders' vital role comes into focus. Each grandmother starts her life as a calf born into her mother's family group, or matriline. The family does everything together, hunting and playing, even communicating through their own unique set of calls. Both sons and daughters spend their entire lives with their mother's families. That doesn't mean a young whale only interacts with her relatives. Besides their own special calls, her matriline shares a dialect with nearby families, and they socialize regularly. Once a female reaches age 15 or so, these meetings become opportunities to mate with males from other groups. The relationships don't go much beyond mating. She and her calves stay with her family, while the male returns to his own mother. Until approximately age 40, she gives birth every 6 years on average. Then she goes through menopause, which is almost unheard of in the animal kingdom. In fact, humans, killer whales, and a few other whales are the only species whose females continue to live for years after they stopped reproducing. After menopause, grandmothers take the lead hunting for salmon, the southern residents' main food source. Most of the winter they forage offshore, supplementing salmon with other fish. But when the salmon head towards shore in droves to spawn, the killer whales follow. The matriarch shows the younger whales where to find the most fertile fishing grounds. She also shares up to 90% of the salmon she catches. With each passing year, her contributions become more vital. Overfishing and habitat destruction have decimated salmon populations, putting the whales at near constant risk of starvation. These grandmothers' expertise can mean the difference between life and death for their families. But why do they stop having calves? It's almost always advantageous for a female to continue reproducing, even if she also cares for her existing children and grandchildren. A couple unique circumstances change this equation for killer whales. The fact that neither sons or daughters leave their families of origin is extremely rare. In almost all animal species, one or both sexes disperse. This means that as a female killer whale ages, a greater percentage of her family consists of her children and grandchildren, while more distant relatives die off. Because older females are more closely related to the group than younger females, they do best to invest in the family as a whole, whereas younger females should invest in reproducing. In the killer whale's environment, every new calf is another mouth to feed on limited, shared resources. An older female can further her genes without burdening her family by supporting her adult sons, whose sire calves other families will raise. This might be why the females have evolved to stop reproducing entirely in middle age. Even with the grandmother's contributions, the southern resident killer whales are critically endangered, largely due to a decline in salmon. We urgently need to invest in restoring salmon populations to save them from extinction. In the long term, we'll need more studies like the Center for Whale Researches. What we've learned about the southern residents may not hold true for other groups. By studying other populations closely, we might uncover more startling adaptations and anticipate their vulnerabilities to human interference before their survival is at risk. Check out this playlist to meet more of the amazing creatures lurking in our ocean's deepest depths.
Waiters always look at me and think that I'm gonna have a little salad, maybe a soup, and that'll be the whole meal. And when I do my
So in this video, we have a few of our kind of best of 2019 drone video. In this first one, we have 3 individuals. So we have the biggest whale that you see here is J47, and the 2 smaller whales are J53 and J56. And J56 was less than a year old, and J53 is a few years old. So these whales are not super closely related. They are all within J-pod, but they're not direct relatives. But we still kind of have, it almost seems like a little bit of babysitting going on here. J56's mother, J31 rather, is not in the frame currently. We didn't actually know where she was when we were filming this, but here she comes up from the deep, and you can actually see she has a fish in her mouth. And she's joined by J46, another J17 whale. So she comes up with this fish. J56 is clearly very, very interested, and she actually bites the fish in half right about there, leaves some of it behind that J46 goes for, along with J53. J47 continues following, kind of maybe hoping for some extra scraps. So that's potentially an example of reciprocation of the babysitting with some food sharing. In this video, we have J36 is the, or rather J37 is the female in the front, and the male behind her is J26. It's unclear exactly what's going on here, but it seemed to be some kind of courtship. J26 kind of followed J37 around for a few minutes. We actually are filming them for about half an hour, and this same kind of behavior kept going. So this could be some kind of courtship. J37 breaching there. Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting contrast to some of the more kind of high energy socializing and sexual behavior we see in a lot of these other videos. Here we have a group consisting of a bunch of K and J-pod whales traveling south along the west side of San Juan Island. That's K34 there at the edge. There's a breach. This is kind of just a travel, but with some socializing. And it's really interesting just seeing how much movement kind of within the group there is. We kind of watch them from the side, and you kind of assume everything is quite steady in terms of where everybody is in the group and how they're interacting. But we actually see quite a bit of movement underwater, quite a bit of kind of mixing around, shifting positions, rolling, even in a situation here where we'd classify it as travel. Same thing here. This is actually heading up into Georgia Strait now, just with J-pod. All of J-pod was actually in this group, other than the J16s. And again, from the surface, this just looks like a bunch of fins coming up and a bunch of traveling whales. When you see underwater, you see they're actually taking looks at each other, moving around the group, quite a bit of touching and rolling, and movement within the group. There's a little bit of a copying going on there, potentially. Yeah, and the water's a bit murkier here, so it's not as clear as some of our other videos, but it's quite nice. And so in this video, you have 3 J17 whales. So you have J46, J44, and J53. So J44 is the whale who just turned on his side there, followed by the other 2. J53 is in the middle, and then J46 is at the top of the screen. the synchronization between these three is really, really interesting to me. The way that even in just small kinds of movements, like turning on your side while you're moving forward, they tend to kind of synchronize and behave in unison, which is really interesting. It's unclear exactly what the function is there, although it probably has something to do with signaling social relationships and social bonds. It's also just lovely to have days like this where the water rather is so clear that you can see them in such detail. So this last video is what we call a cuddle puddle, just a whole bunch of J-pod whales, kind of all together, a lot of tactile rubbing, some sexual behavior, but for killer whales, it kind of seems like sexual behavior and social behavior are pretty interchangeable. Something I find quite interesting about this video is how central the youngest calf, J56, is to all this socialization. So J56 is the whale who just kind of got tossed a little bit just there, which is actually something we see quite a lot. She seems to kind of enjoy it a bit. Doesn't seem to be an aggressive behavior, and in fact, that was her mother who just tossed her. And you'll actually see as they kind of form this puddle, she ends up right in between a whole bunch of whales, kind of sandwiched in there. We don't know a lot about how cooperative care for young works in these killer whales, but it does seem to be a really important part of a lot of other whales' kind of lifestyles and group living. And I think that's reflected here really, really kind of nicely and beautifully by how kind of physically central the youngest calves are in these big bouts of socialization in these whales. Really just kind of laying on top of both their mom, but also other females, other members of the pod who aren't even really very closely related, all seem to kind of be drawn to these little calves. It's a really, really interesting phenomenon. No fun to code all of the various contacts in this group, keeping track of who's touching who and who's interacting, but really, really nice to watch.
That was just an amazing look at those whales interacting so lovingly. You really see how they bond with each other forever. So now we would like to show probably a shortened version of an amazing video called Contrasts that gives a sense of the wild environment, the real habitat, the real living in nature, and the captive setting. And unfortunately, I don't think we have time for the whole thing, but we will put a link to the whole thing so everyone can see it here. So let's go ahead and show Contrasts.
What is freedom? It is to be able to choose your course and direction at the speed you want and with whomever you want. It is being able to express yourself. It's creating tight-knit family bonds by sharing your life with them. It is to travel without limits the immensity of the ocean and swim a vast distance in a single day. It is coming from the depths to the surface and back. It is to recognize your natural habitat. It is being able to communicate with those who speak the same language. It is independence, will, and autonomy. Freedom is the foundation of all your rights. Freedom is having a calf and being able to raise it. It is to be by their side at all times. It's teaching them the fundamentals of life. And choosing who will partake in their upbringing. It is to be in sync with your family. It is continuing the traditions of your ancestors. Like in Canada, orca culture is evident when they rub their bodies against the rocks on the seabed. Why? It is believed that it is for pleasure. Research shows this has been passed down through generations. And this particular orca population has been studied for decades by OrcaLab and filmed underwater by Explore.
Very beautiful, and the entire video is just so eye-opening. I recommend you go to the link. It was just put in the chat to go ahead and look at all of it. So,
yeah, so we are going to close with a video ceremony. It's not quite the same as a live ceremony, but just hope you will all hold Toki and all of her family in your hearts as you watch this. And we will again share the link to the Lummi video or the Lummi live streaming event, which starts at 4 o'clock. And we will have a recorded video of this event available on our YouTube channel soon. And I did post the link to our Coach Salish event from June in the chat as well, but it's also on our YouTube channel. So thank you all for coming and joining us today. And I know many of you have been doing this with us for several decades. Toki knows that we're there for her, and we are going to keep fighting to get her home until she's home. So thank you, and we'll close with the ceremony. Okay, well, we have 2 more minutes, so we have another music video. We will show while people are logging off, or if you aren't going to the Lummi event, from the Nelson family. That's a little more upbeat.
It's a beautiful song.
end with.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to be able to bring this all together.
Thank you to our staff.
Thanks everybody for joining us.
Cold are the currents we follow that lead to the coast. Steady the wind in the sails of the greedy man's boat. breaking the waves on my back as they get me alone. They'll stop at nothing to take me from all that I've known. Whoa, 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 let me go, let me home. Whoa, 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 back to the waters I know, where the waters run cold. Serving a sentence for a crime that I don't understand. Is a body in shape the definitive trait of a man? For I have a heart and a soul and a family. By the laws that you live by, doesn't that mean that I should be free? Whoa, 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 let me go, let me go. Whoa, 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 back to the waters I know, where the waters run cold to the sea. This dream to be free keeps me up at night. I hear the voice of my mother ringing in my ears, and nobody else seems to notice. Such is the life of the blackfish. Round and around go the years as I circle the drain. Decades of waiting on a verdict that won't change the pain. 'Cause once you've known freedom, that feeling cannot be erased. But in order to know that, you have to have been in my place. Whoa, 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 let me go, let me go. Whoa, 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 back to the waters I know, back to the currents that I call home, back to the waters I know, where the waters run cold.